Hey gang, it's Squill, and now that we've been introduced to Fionna and her arc in Fionna and Cake, it's time we discuss the introduction to the real main character, Simon Petrikov. This is the only episode in which Fionna doesn't appear in at all, although technically Cake gets an appearance at the very end. And as such, the episode is entirely dedicated to setting up Simon's arc for the rest of the miniseries. So let's get into it and see how well it does. But before that, we got a new intro to discuss. I love just how cryptic this intro is, giving us little flashes of events that'll take place in future episodes. It was really fun speculating about where certain snippets would take place while watching the miniseries play out. Obviously now I know where every shot takes place in the miniseries, but the intro still does a great job getting me hyped up for episodes. I think I still prefer Fionna Campbell's intro as a whole, since I like the song more and I find the visuals to be more charming, but this intro is still really great too. Simon Petrikov opens up in probably the best way it possibly could, with a Simon and Marcy flashback, baby. Y'all have no idea how hard I gasped when I saw this cold open for the first time. I love the little detail of Simon almost putting the crown on, but Marcy stopping him. It's something that comes back later on in the episode, but it shows that Simon has almost sort of an addiction to wearing the crown. He views it as a noble sacrifice he's making to protect Marcy. But it's also something that's pushing her away from him and making him dangerous to her. Which isn't to say that there weren't times in which Simon genuinely needed to use the crown. But this scene, as well as Simon and Marcy, definitely implies that Simon didn't need to use it as much as he did. This scene also does an excellent job setting up Simon's story for the rest of the episode. Now that Marcy's grown up and is living the domestic life with PB, she doesn't really have any need for Simon, thus leaving Simon depressed and purposeless. Overall, this cold open was a great start to the episode. It's definitely very fanservice-y, but it does a great job setting up Simon's conflict for the rest of the episode. But speaking of Simon, let's talk about him a little bit. Come Along With Me left Simon's story off in a very interesting place. He was finally himself again after all these years, but it wasn't quite a happily ever after. After all, he was still missing the one person he was obsessed with for all this time. Even in the montage, we see Simon try and fail to pull Betty back from the Maw of Gold via Prismo's time room. But considering the fact that it was the end of the show, Come Along With Me didn't really have enough time to elaborate on any of this. Simon does appear again in Obsidian, however it's very brief considering the story isn't really about him. Though we do get an intriguing glimpse of him coping with the fact that he used to be Ice King for so long. It's not much, but it's enough to understand that maybe Simon isn't doing too well. Fionna and Cake took the ideas presented in Come Along With Me and Obsidian and ran with them. Making Simon full-on depressed was a very bold decision that makes so much sense for his character. He doesn't have any sense of belonging in this world. The one person he could possibly relate to is just gone. Simon being a fish out of water in this world is best presented through his job. He's basically treated as a relic of the 20th century, with his old life on display for everyone to gawk at. Oh, and speaking of which, it's in this episode that we're introduced to the Human Society. The humans settling on New was definitely one of the biggest unresolved plot points from the original series, so it was great to get a glimpse of what life is like for the humans now that they live on New. I definitely hope we get a story centered around the humans settling on New sometime in the future, but hey, I'll take what I can get. The only one of these humans we're fully acquainted with, however, is Astrid, a Fionna and Cake fangirl who bugs Simon about the stories on a daily basis. She gets a bit more to do in the next episode, but she doesn't really have a major role in the miniseries as a whole. If this were a Distant Land special, she definitely would have played a similar role to Glass Boy in Obsidian, with her being the child entry point character. Beyond that, I don't really have much to say about Astrid. She's fine. She serves her role in the story well enough, but she doesn't really do much for me outside of that. But one thing interesting I do want to talk about is just how many parallels there are between this episode and Fionna Campbell. Both episodes include cold opens depicting the titular characters in their previous magical states. In Fionna Campbell, Fionna wakes up to an alarm clock, whereas Simon is seen already awake when his goes off. Both characters are seen working a mundane job that they hate. They both end up in a magical forest area. They both pass by similar people while taking a walk. And most importantly, the only show available to watch in Fiona's world is Cheers, a show that Simon seems to have on basically all the time. In Simon and Marcy, Simon used Cheers as a way to ground himself, to remind him of his old life and help keep him sane when he felt the crown taking over. And in the modern day, he seems to similarly use the show Cheers as an escape from his everyday life. Simon wants desperately to go to a bar with a bunch of mundane, normal people. But instead, when he goes to a bar, he's greeted with a bunch of wacky candy people. And that includes a dirt beer guy. It was great to see him again. I love it whenever Adventure Time brings back random minor characters for no real reason. I love how his appearance here keeps up the trend from Abstract of Dirt Beer Guy being the worst person to go to after having gone through some magical transformation. When he said his iconic line, "Well, that's really something," I clapped. Wow, I can't believe we're about 6 minutes into the video and I haven't even discussed Finn yet. This is a dense episode. Finn telling Simon he used to bust his balls kinda broke me my first time watching this. I was not expecting that at all. I'll be honest, before these episodes released, I was not expecting Finn to be in this miniseries very much. I was thinking maybe a few lines and like 1 or 2 scenes. But while this is the only episode where he appears, he basically gets most of the episode. I love his dynamic with Simon here. He obviously doesn't know how to help Simon, but he still tries his best anyways. As evident by the reappearance of the Jake tattoo from Obsidian, Finn is still very clearly dealing with the loss of Jake here, and he's using this quest as a way to avoid dealing with his emotions, which isn't too dissimilar to what we see him do in an episode like Dungeon Train. I think it's safe to say that losing Jake probably caused Finn to emotionally regress in some ways. But hey, it was still awesome to see him interact with Simon some more. Their dynamic is so fun. Oh, and also TV gets a brief appearance. I love the idea that ever since Jake's death, Finn has just been going on adventures with the pups. Now where's my Finn and Gibbon episode, damn it? But going back to Simon for a minute, this bar scene is very interesting for him too. He clearly still has a ton of built-up trauma from being the Ice King for so long. I love how Simon mentions the fact that he sometimes dresses up as Ice King, something that we actually saw in Obsidian, but there it was played off as a joke. Here it's given much more dramatic weight, as we learn that Simon actually kind of misses being the Ice King. While Simon was definitely still depressed as Ice King, it was far easier for him to repress it. Heck, he had even gotten a lot better by the end of the series. People were far more willing to be around him. There's an argument to be made that Simon was happier as Ice King, and that Betty ignored Ice King's autonomy by bringing Simon back. Though it's definitely a moral gray area, since you can also argue that with a clear head not influenced by the crown, Simon can better work through his issues. Even if he was getting better, to some extent he was still getting tormented by the crown. Also, and I felt like I should just get this out of the way here so I don't have to keep mentioning it in every other video, but Tom Kenny's performance as Simon here is excellent. Like, this is easily the hardest Tom Kenny's acted in basically anything. He makes Simon sound so raw and human. It's crazy just imagining him going back to playing the Bob after this. Anyways, actually getting into Finn and Simon's quest, I really like the design of the Heart of the Forest here. It's really beautiful. I also love this Hall of Egress reference. Not only is it funny, but it shows just how much Finn grew from that experience. One interesting thing to note is that Finn mentions Huntress Wizard a couple times in this episode. Their status was left sort of open-ended by the end of the original series, which led a lot of people to believe that by this time they're dating. Personally, I like to believe they got a sort of friends with benefits thing going on, but to each their own. Finn attacking the sea monster is probably the goriest scene in the entire series. Like damn, they're really taking advantage of that TV-14 rating. I loved Finn thanking the creature for his sacrifice. This campfire scene is one of my favorites in the episode. It's interesting that the only time we see Simon genuinely happy in this episode, or for really the entirety of the first 4 episodes, is when he's talking about Betty. Finn gives Simon some pretty rough advice here to not talk or think about sad stuff and just forget about it. Dude clearly means well, but it's obvious that Simon needs to talk about his issues in order to work through them. Instead, he sends Simon to collect sticks as a distraction. While doing so, he is attacked by a bear, and Simon is made to feel even more out of place in this world than he already was. It's also in the scene that we get this crazy nasty shot of Finn's back. It's at this point that Finn and Simon part ways. I definitely would have liked at least one more adult Finn appearance at some point in the miniseries, but I get that the story's about Simon and not Finn. Hopefully we get a miniseries or special focused on him and Huntress Wizard at some point in the near future. It's at this point that we get the first of 2 Rebecca Sugar songs in the miniseries, that being part of the madness. It's not my favorite song in the miniseries, but I quite like it. Rebecca's soft and somber vocals match the melancholy of the scene quite well. And I love the way it's instantly juxtaposed by the music that plays in Marcy's scene. And oh yeah, Marcy and PB are in this episode. I really like their scene, but it's kinda hurt by it being the only scene we get of adult Prime Universe Marceline. Like, I'm not casting any moral judgment on her, I get that it was just bad timing, but it's a little weird how the only scene we get of Marcy in this entire series is her just ignoring Simon's issues. I just feel like the scene should have been bookended later on by Simon actually opening up about his issues to Marcy. Because it's definitely weird having a story so focused on Simon including such little Marcy content. The moment still works in a vacuum since the entire point is that Simon isn't at a place where he can open up to Marcy. I just think it would have been improved by getting some actual payoff to it. I do think it's funny, however, that we've gotten to a point where PB and Marcy are 2 of the most mentally well characters in Adventure Time. PB specifically seems to have chilled out a ton, even since Obsidian. Anyways, everything about the last few minutes of this episode is perfect. I mean, first off, we have the amazing return of Shoes Goose. To be honest, I wasn't really expecting the cliffhanger from the end of Wizard City to be followed up so soon. But he works perfectly here. I don't think I would have liked the story where Shoes Goose is the main antagonist, but him just playing a minor role in Simon's story was a great idea. We'll see a couple more alternate versions of Shoes Goose later on in Fionna and Cake, and I think it's just really funny how much the Adventure Time crew fell in love with this character after the original series ended. Sincerely hope he reappears in every Adventure Time spin-off. The ritual sequence is done so well too. It's just so creepy and ominous, I love it. Simon's eyes being covered by his glasses is another cool detail that really sells just how creepy the scene is. The ritual fails, resulting in Cake popping out of Simon's head, and the episode ends on a shot of the remote in Prismo's time room gaining a new button. As you can probably tell by just how much I've had to say about it in comparison to Fionna Campbell, I love Simon Petrikov. I think it's one of the best episodes of the miniseries. It's such a great character study on Simon and his role in this world now that he's non-magical. It does an amazing job setting up Simon's arc and character journey for the rest of the miniseries. And on top of that, an excellent portrayal of Finn in his adult life. We really need more Finn and Simon stories, they're such a wholesome duo. Heck, my only real criticism of the episode is really more of a problem with the rest of the miniseries than this episode specifically. A top-tier Adventure Time episode overall. The excellent main course to accompany the already really strong appetizer that was Fionna Campbell. And with that, let me know your thoughts on the episode in the comments. Squill out.